So today I'm talking about a breaking news story that only occurred yesterday, May 2024, depending when you are watching this video. And it's almost quite unbelievable that a person entered the Jewish Dwelling Place Church in North Braddock, Pennsylvania, and he goes to the front of a church. He pulls out a firearm on the pastor. The gun does not discharge, and he is wrestled to the ground. It's an unbelievable incident, which again is caught on the live stream feed of the church. So, what I'm going to do is we're going to play the video. We've got two videos to play. Then we're going to come back and break them down. So, let's go to the first video now.
Pennsylvania, and the dramatic scene playing out during a church service. A man suddenly standing, pointing a gun at the pastor. ABC's Derek Dennis shows us what happened next.
This morning, Pastor Glenn Germany says he's grateful to God to be alive.
And God has chosen. Jesus!
A gunman interrupted the pastor's Sunday sermon in North Braddock outside Pittsburgh, pointing that gun at him. Witnesses say the man pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. All of it caught on the church's live stream.
All of a sudden, I just seen a gun pointing right at me. And at that point, all I could do was try to run for cover.
Church members jumping into action, tackling the
I mean, that video is almost hard to watch. How bad could that have been? But it really shows that we serve an incredible God, and it wasn't that pastor's time to die. How different could that have been? And who knows what he would have then done had he then killed the pastor. I want to show you the second video where the person that tackled the assailant, who is videoing the live stream, is interviewed. So let's go to that video. We're going to come back and we're going to break this down step by step.
I could see was somebody walked up on the pulpit, and after they got up on the pulpit, they raised the gun up. Once they raised the gun up, I jumped up, you know what I mean, from behind, got him from behind, struggled him down to the ground.
The deacon at the church pulling the gun away, eliminating the threat.
He could have lost his life in that struggle, but he sacrificed himself for everyone, and he's the hero.
The pastor says he'd never seen the gunman before yesterday, but noticed him frequently coming in and out of the church, making eye contact and smiling at him.
So now we've watched those two videos to see what happened. Let's break it down section by section. The first thing that I want to do is start off with the behavior indicators. So the pastor did say that he noticed him several times coming in and out of the church. And the pastor said he saw him come from the back of the church to the front, and then he sat down at the front of the church. So the pastor, reflecting later, this was clearly different for him outside of baseline, and his attention was drawn to this person. There are always pre-incident behaviors. As humans, we give away so much. I often teach in my threat detection course, what is your baseline? And when you see behaviors outside of that baseline, that is generally an indication that all might not be well. So I'm assuming here from what the pastor says that this was different because this man drew his attention. The other interesting thing that I always teach is there's a lot of Israeli tactics out there. And when I was at Mall of America, I tried to neutralize a lot of those Israeli tactics where they call it security interviewing. I developed a thing that we call in our threat detection course conversational interviewing. What I didn't hear anyone do was go and talk to this individual when he first arrived. And it's a bit similar to the West Freeway church shooting in 2019 with Jack Wilson neutralized the threat. He did an incredible thing that day by neutralizing an armed gunman who had already killed two people inside the church. However, why was that person inside the church and what was that interaction? So it does seem, if we play Monday morning quarterback where we get our best learning, it does seem like there was an opportunity to at least engage this individual, find out who he was, what brought him to the church, where does he live? We're really excited to lead you to Christ. So there were some behavior indicators, and perhaps there could have been some connection from the church, because security is ministry. Everyone on your security team should be prepared to kiss a baby, shake hands, and welcome someone to the church. The other thing that I want to talk about with his behavior is that His gun didn't appear to be too concealed. Now, he had it down his pants. We can see that he had a dark t-shirt on. How visible was it? We might know more in time, but the gun was most probably tucked down his pants. He didn't appear to be wearing a holster. So there's always behavior indicators in these cases. So a question I want to pose to you is, knowing that the pastor had seen some of these unusual behaviors leading up to this incident, how could he have communicated with other people in the congregation? Or how can you communicate with your pastor when you see behaviors that are outside of baseline? Really important that we answer this question. How do we communicate with our pastor during the service when we see something or when they see something? So let's break down the video for a few moments as to what we saw. Now, when the man entered, he pulled the gun on the pastor. The first thing the pastor did was duck for cover. Now, I'm going to break down each person's different movements because we all respond differently, and it's very challenging until we're in the situation such as this to truly know how we respond. But what we do know is that the pastor ducked for cover. Was that good? A good strategy? Well, no, he should have continued running. What we also didn't see was any pastoral protection, anyone coming to the pastor's rescue or aid and support. He was just left to his own devices to duck. What I often see when people respond in this way is more than likely they haven't had any active shooter survival training. You must take positive steps. Cowering in the corner, hiding behind the podium at the church in the sanctuary is not a safe place for you. So that was the first thing we saw. The pastor ducked for cover. The second thing that we heard someone say, and I believe this was the cameraman who came to the pastor's rescue, but we heard someone say, Jesus, Jesus twice. Why did they say this? Well, it was more than likely because it was unbelievable what they were seeing. They were I think he was in shock for 2 or 3 seconds before he responded, saying Jesus, Jesus, because he just couldn't believe what he saw to be true. And this happens to a lot of us in stressful situations. Our body takes 2 or 3 seconds to process this, to say, is what I'm seeing real? And then eventually the hormones level, and then we can make rational decisions. But by him saying Jesus, Jesus, and pausing, that is a perfectly natural reaction. And again, training and awareness can overcome that a little bit. But it's just interesting to know we all respond differently in these situations. The pastor ducked and hid for cover. The cameraman, we believe, says Jesus, Jesus, and came to the pastor's aid. What we also see in this is that the organist, I think he's the organist, he sat to the back left of the pastor. Maybe there's a different role, could be controlling light or something else, but I believe he is the organist. Do you notice that he does not move? Similar to the cameraman that said Jesus, Jesus, and froze for a few seconds and then interacts. The organist didn't move almost until the assailant was detained on the floor. Was he scared? Was he fearful for his life? More than likely, he froze again. He could not believe what he was seeing was true, and it took his body a moment to process what is going on, and then he responded and came to aid. So very interesting here. Again, everyone is responding to this in a different way. The next thing that I saw, or that I didn't see, which is what we saw at Jack Wilson's church in 2019, is that every person at Jack Wilson's church at the West Freeway seemed to have a firearm, and post the incident, everyone had their guns out and there was muzzles everywhere and it was a bit chaotic. We didn't see that here. There was no one from the congregation that came to the aid other than the cameraman who was live streaming, who said Jesus, Jesus, kicked in and then tackles the assailant. So interesting again, if you haven't done active shooter survival training at your house of worship, this is how you build muscle memory to make people, to compel people to take some type of action. We don't know who they were, and I don't really want to judge them too harshly. However, it's a great example again that people did not respond. In an active assailant situation, we must respond quickly. And yes, the gun failed to discharge, but also he was quickly subdued by the cameraman who came from the back and then dived on him. So very interesting that the congregation did not move. Now, we had the man jump on him, and we know this is Clarence McAllister. What an amazing guy he was to see the danger, level set himself, and respond and dive on the individual. And as the pastor said, this person is a hero because he didn't think about himself. He thought about what is the right thing to do in that moment. Everyone is going to respond differently. Just in what I've broken down here, we can see how people responded in a different way. The congregation here seems to have been quite absent. What I'd like to have seen, honestly, is hopefully more people trying to dive on the assailant, which is needed to show that everyone's thinking about it, they're prepared, and they're ready for this day. So let's now look at, well, who was the attacker and what was his motive? But it's most probably a bit early to talk about what his motive is. This is only less than 48 hours old. But we do know this is a 26-year-old individual. I'm not going to say his name. We try not to give them the notoriety that they may perhaps want. But we do know that there was someone called Derek Polite, or maybe it's Polite, how you say his name, was deceased at his home, so a relative. So the inference is, as we stand today, that he'd already killed someone at his home, and for whatever reason, he was coming to the church to kill the pastor. So we know he was 26 years old and he had already killed someone at his home. What we do know from the pastor was, the pastor said later, we need to tackle the true epidemic in the US right now, which is mental health. So very interesting there. I want to talk about something which is often neglected in these active assailant attacks, and that is the post-traumatic stress and what happens post these incidents. So the first thing is the congregation are going to be suffering from post-traumatic stress, having witnessed an incredible ordeal where there, but for the grace of God, on another day when the firearm didn't jam, the pastor would have been killed in front of them. Can you imagine being one of those people in the congregation, seeing someone pull a firearm on your pastor and you hear the click but it doesn't discharge? What a traumatic event that is. So in the post-incident recovery care, we need to think about who are those counselors, who are those people that come alongside our congregation, because they will be very traumatized by what they have seen. So post-incident care congregation. The post-incident care for the pastor, now this is most often overlooked, and I know a lot of pastors and leaders say, well, I've been trained for this. This is, I'm a counselor. My role is to lead people to Christ and work through conflict and troubles. I understand that, but what a traumatic incident for this pastor to have his entire life flash in front of him, only for the gun not to discharge, and then he's having to then go and subdue the assailant. What does that post-incident care look like? I've read numerous articles about this, and one thing that he said he was most concerned about was his 14-year-old daughter. Now, my regular listeners know that I'm the father of two boys, 10 and 13. I can only imagine what my family would feel if they were in that room and they saw someone not only pull a gun on me, but actually fire that gun and the gun doesn't discharge. That is a very, very traumatic event. So it's really important that we consider post-incident care, and for religious leader, even if they say they don't want it, they've gone through something incredibly traumatic, and they may even have family members in the church, such as this 14-year-old girl. This was being live streamed. The person that jumped on the assailant was the cameraman. The videos I just showed you are from the church's live feed. Post-incident care, can you imagine being one of those people at home where you're watching this and someone pulls a gun on your pastor And you may even hear that click if you listen very intently. Those people could be hundreds, could be thousands across the world. They could be traumatized by this incident. How do you offer them support and care in the moment? Really interesting. This, like I said, this isn't something which is often spoke about too much, but the post-incident care, what does it look like? And then we have those people involved. We have Clarence, the cameraman. We have the organist, if that's what he was. Those people are involved that had to restrain this individual, had to wait for the police to come, when their mind is processing, thinking how different this could have been, what might have happened to the congregation. Was he just after the pastor or everyone else? There is so much to think about here. Post-incident care for everyone involved. What would that look like at your house of worship? Where would you get those support services from? The time to think about that is perhaps not in the moment. It's post this event where you're going to wish that I had a name of a counselor that we could ring up now. We can give these people the stress counseling that they need. So let's think about this now. Let's try and find a counselor. Let's collect these numbers. Let's collect these websites. So if anything traumatic such as this occurs at your house of worship, you have a plan and you know who to call. Immediately, these people need support and assistance. I hazard a guess that many people in that faith community might have been struggling to sleep last night, thinking, how could this have been differently? So let's look at what we can learn from this incident. Well, the first thing is that there are always pre-incident behaviors. When I spent time at Mall of America as head of counterterrorism and in charge of the behavior detection unit, we used to teach behavior threat assessment many, many years ago. There are always human pre-incident behaviors. In this occasion, it appears that the man caught the pastor's attention because he kept coming in and out of the church. He walked from the back of a church to the front of a church. He sat down and then he got up during the service. Clearly, he stood in the way of the camera, which was live streaming. So challenging, we see a piece of the pie. We never see all the pie, but there were pre-incident behaviors. The next thing I see in this incident is that this person was new to the church. He had not been before. Now, what I like to see happen, not for you ushers or greeters if you're watching this, but for you church safety personnel, is reach out your hand, welcome that person to the church. Would really love to get to know you. We have great men's programs, we have great father programs, we have great marriage programs. We have all this stuff going on at church. Would love to learn more about you and your faith journey. We saw this again at the White Settlement in Texas in 2019, but the assailant got into the church. There was an opportunity to stop the assailant coming inside the church in the first place. When we see people new, not ushers, not greeters, I'm talking about you as a security practitioner, reach out your hand, get to know the person. Security is ministry. Security is ministry. If you cannot do those things, I would challenge you as to if you're serving in the right time. You're going to find out so much more information. This person then might have been flagged as unusual, or his behaviors outside of baseline long before he sat at the front of a church. Someone should have reached out to him, got to know him to say, actually, this guy is a bit different for our environment. The next thing that we have, I mentioned that he sat at the church, new to a church. People reacted very differently, and that is okay. We have in the Worship Security Academy, we have a 90 minutes active shooter survival course. If you have never taken active shooter survival training before, I will drop the link below to our course. It's 90 minutes. We saw that people responded differently. What we can do, we know that the Marines say the body cannot go where the mind hasn't been. We can train our mind to respond in different ways, particularly in adverse situations which are highly stressed. You need to take an active shooter survival awareness course and learn how to train your body. So in that moment, you have the muscle memory, you can see the incident, it's happening in real time, but in your mind, it's happening slowly and you know what to respond. So we saw that everyone responded differently. That's okay. However, we are going to train our mind to make sure we are ready. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention, I'm sure a lot of you saying, well, Simon, you haven't mentioned what the church's response was. Yes, there did not seem to be any firearms inside the church. Now, you may believe in firearms in the church, you may not believe in firearms in the church. Here's how I answer that question. If the day of evil ever comes to your house of worship, and one day it might come, if it does, how are you going to respond to an incident such as this? What does that look like? Plan accordingly, train, create standards. Because what we saw again in the 2019 white settlement with Jack Wilson was afterwards, every person seemed to have a gun and was muzzling. There was muzzles everywhere inside that church. We didn't see that here. So maybe they didn't have a safety team and maybe they didn't have a firearms response. A great question to ask if you don't have a safety team or if you don't have a firearms response at present in your church is to answer this tragic question. If the gun had gone bang and it killed the pastor, do we think, would he have stopped there? If he wouldn't have stopped there and would carry on shooting, how would we then defend ourselves? Those are the questions that you need to ask. So yes, for my gun followers there did not seem to be an armed response in the church. And yes, the answer is when someone pulls a firearm on someone, a deadly force weapon designed to kill, you do not need to wait for that person to kill your pastor before you neutralize the threat, i.e., you take their life. That is another challenging question that we have as permit to carry holders, of which I am one. I do not need to wait for that person to take human life before I take their life. If I'd had a firearm in that room, I, with many others on my church safety team, would have pulled the trigger and would have taken that person's life long before he got into that position to pull the trigger on the pastor. So hopefully that analysis has helped you in some way. It's been a very interesting case. Lots of learning there, lots of questions that you can ask in your own house of worship. What would you do differently? What do you think they did well? Where was the learning? And remember the aftercare. We always forget what happens post, but these are incredibly stressful, traumatic incidents. So please make sure you are considering how your community would recover. But for now, I'm grateful for God. I pray to God that this ended the way that it did. And I'm grateful that God has given us the opportunity to learn from this event in our own house of worship as we reflect what would we do differently. So thank you for joining me on this analysis. For now, you stay safe, you have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.